Or in Japan, we read about...
how did they forget it? They didn't use it in the 19th century.
People used homemade and things that they came up with on their own.
Because no one talked about it.
Nobody talked about it. We did a radio interview recently with Susan Kim, my co-author, and spoke to some women in the Midwest in Kansas City who said they remembered that there would be a boiling day.
Oh, really?
And everybody on their block would come and boil all their rags that they used, and then they'd hang them on a clothesline
to sanitize them for next month.
Right, in between two white sheets, and all the men would go off and do something for the day. They were sort of not welcome in the neighborhood during boiling day.
Now, I remember when I was in college, University of Wisconsin, the big thing was toxic shock syndrome associated with tampons.
With use of tampons.
Yes.
Tampons. What do you touch on that? What was that?
Yes, absolutely. When in the late 70s, a product was developed that wicked away more than just menstrual blood, and it wicked away healthy things that were inside a woman's body. And then that gave other viruses an opportunity to grow. And because all the healthy things were being sucked out, then a woman who had these things naturally in her body, suddenly they could take over. But apparently tampon manufacturers knew that this was an issue and sort of didn't take responsibility for it for a while. In the same way, another thing that we researched was birth control pills and hormone replacement therapy, which as well, at the very beginning, the dosages were so high that they were causing, especially birth control pills, strokes and heart attacks, and women were dying. And it turned out that the manufacturers made them 10 times as powerful as they needed to be, just to make sure women wouldn't get pregnant.
Or to give it that 99%.
Right, just to make sure that women would, to get FDA approval without actually thinking, oh, wait a second, there
that
are
might hurt
side
somebody.
effects that are happening. Yeah, or hormone replacement therapy as well caused cancer.
Can we find some interesting photographs here or some interesting ads that we can show?
Oh, sure.
Oh, definitely.
Something interesting here?
I'm going to switch with you. Some of my favorite ads were for douches. We talk a whole bunch here about douching and how women were convinced for years and years that this was what they needed to keep themselves healthy, but also for hygiene, for protection, to keep their marriages intact. And the biggest selling douche was Lysol.
Wow.
Oh.
Yes.
Wow.
Can you imagine? The same exact bottle that you would use for your bathroom or your kitchen floor.
Carbolic acid.
Like these are...
Oh, we'll pick it up here to this. Take it to the screen here.
There were two products that were huge for decades and decades, Lysol and something called Zonite, which was a water bleach mix.
Oh, what do they mean by safe? Can a woman ever feel safe? From what?
In her marriage.
Well, what these ads alluded to was that a woman was internally unclean. These became really popular after germs were discovered, the early 1900s, and there was this huge germophobic revolution. And so manufacturers said, oh my God,
and a surge in products.
Here's a whole entire new avenue for us to advertise to. Let's tell women that their insides are dirty, filled with germs, unclean, and then we'll come up with products for them to use. And so Lysol hopped on the bandwagon and for decades spun these tales about how women's husbands, my favorite was, if only she knew she was the cause of her husband's frigidity.
Oh, dear.
And would show a sobbing woman with her husband out the door with a coat. And these ran in all the popular movie magazines and
so people
terrorizing people.
They would put bleach into themselves and things like
bleach and Lysol.
Ugh.
I know, and it caused scalding and burning. But another thing that was super fascinating was these ads were, they were directed at married women only. And like this was this code to say that it was a spermicide. And people believed that if you douched after sex, that it would kill the sperm and you couldn't get pregnant.
Do you know it was in many places illegal for a unmarried woman to be a elementary school teacher? Yes.
Oh, no, to be pregnant.
Unmarried and then later pregnant by the 50s. But still, it was illegal at first.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, for women to be elementary and other for married women and pregnant women to unmarried women. I'm sorry, did I say married? I meant unmarried. Unmarried women to be
pregnant
or pregnant women to be.
That's
and later on, it was you could be unmarried, but you couldn't be pregnant. And then they finally when they had
broke the whole.
Well, I wrote a book a few books ago about stewardesses, and that was another very industry controlling thing where you could not be married.
Yeah.
And if you were married, and if you were generally the cutoff age was 28.
Yeah.
But then you couldn't have the job anymore.
No, you also wrote a book about pageants, right?
I did, Beauty Queen.
I love pageants, but we'll go back to this.
How people can learn about this book.
Oh, sure. The website for Flow is www.flowthebook.com. And it's got...
Let's say they get a little more slowly.
Oh, sure.
www.flowthebook.com.
Okay. It's got ads from the book. It's got fan photos. We have people
great.
all over the country who've been taking pictures of.
Yeah.
In fact, one of my favorites was a woman went to Target to buy her copy of Flow, and she photographed the entire journey. So there's Flow out to dinner, Flow in the bathroom next to the tampons, Flow on the conveyor belt, Flow strapped into the car seat.
Right. Tell us a little bit about this picture. We were talking about the cover photograph.
Because I love it. Yeah, it's up here behind us.
This is such a terrific image. This is actually a Janssen bathing suit ad, I believe from 1938, by a very famous illustrator named George Petty. And he was famous for doing all the 30s and 40s super busty pinup
I love
things.
that.
And his work is tremendous. And I was telling Joan before, this is actually the most tame of any of the women. It's usually far more see-through and far more voluptuous. But the designer just really captured...
She's perfect, isn't she?
She's perfect. And I love the calendar up in the corner. So it's sort of this total bathing beauty pinup, but you know that she's really keeping track of where she's got it.
And wearing a red suit.
And wearing the red suit.
Right.
With
playing it
right
safe,
over her uterus. You can't miss what the book is about.
So there's
I love this ad. Put this ad up.
Okay, what's
That's
this?
Great.
What's this all about?
It's about watching out for not having accidents. Embarrassing things can happen, but
Right. But
if you just buy our product, it will not.
And that's what is really so interesting about the advertising and how successful it is.
It works.
Because in the very beginning, the hardest part these advertisers had was convincing women to buy their products because it was an expense they didn't have before. Nobody ever needed to use them before. So they advertised to wealthy women, to wealthy white women. But to talk about something that nobody talked about and try to run ads for it. Kotex used to say in their ads, just ask for it by name, and a woman would hand you a brown paper box. So you never had to see a logo on it or anything, or you could even put
no one else
box
had
on the
to
counter.
see you.
When did they start actually putting it in the drugstore where anybody can see it? But even now, it's sort of in its own little section, away.
Sure, the feminine hygiene.
In the feminine hygiene section.
Sure.
Do you talk about the feminine hygiene products that were sold in the 1970s, the sprays and weird things that you don't really see anymore?
Right. Well, that's douching, which was so big.
What was that
FDS.
FDS.
FDS, feminine
Those
deodorant
strange
spray.
ads.
Right. I remember looking through magazines and having no idea what they
is
were.
this,
It was a naked woman's silhouette and a body, at the bottle, and just FDS. And
thinking, what do you do with that?
Well, because they're unhealthy. And eventually the FDA caught on that douching and using these sprays and introducing chemicals into this really sensitive part of your body is really bad for you.
Speaking of chemicals, what about Midol and cramps? Let's go into the section of cramps. What's the social history of cramps?
Social history of cramps. Well, what's really one of the most fascinating things is that in studies that have been done, which aren't all that much, people don't really do studies on healthy women and periods, that there isn't a difference in hormones in a woman when she's premenstrual or when she has her period. And nobody knows exactly what PMS is, and yet 99% of women surveyed have some symptom, whether it's you get bloated or your face breaks out or you have cramps or whatever. There are such powerful symptoms from mild to severe that really need some strong medical intervention.
Well, how about PMS being sort of like it's sort of like a synonym for like a temper tantrum or something like that.
Right.
Uh-oh.
It was the man in the room who said
Who
that.
asked that question?
There's two ways of looking at that because for a lot of people they are more emotional. I think Roseanne Barr said that that it's the only time a woman can act like a man does is by using PMS as an excuse. Because it's in some ways it's an opportunity to really let go and voice how you feel and not have the constrictions that as women have been forced to have for so many years.
Well, I know, again, let the man bring it up, because there's a lot of negative things out there among men about women on the period. For example, you say on the rag, not a very nice thing to say about somebody, or one cultural slogan is to call a person a bumbaclot or something like that, a terrible name, like women are dirty when they're having their period in certain cultures, and they have to be kicked out of the house to this day. I mean, things like that.
This fascinated me to no end in that the Bible, in the Bible, it says women are unclean when they have their periods and you can't touch them. I mean, let alone have sex. But even if a woman sits on a seat, the seat becomes unclean.
That's it. Yeah.
And that's why for Hasidic Jews and for really religious sects, things are kept so different, and it's all because of menstruation.